What if I told you that single men, yes, the ones living outside the framework of family, tradition, and long-term relationships, aren't just misunderstood? They're feared, not in a creepy guy down the alleyway, but in a deeper, more structural sense. Because a man who doesn't play by society's rules is a man society can't control. And that terrifies people. Let's get uncomfortable for a second. Have you ever noticed how single men are portrayed in media? They're either emotionally stunted, predatory, or forever incomplete. The narrative is always the same. If he's alone, something must be wrong with him. Let me ask you, have you ever felt judged simply for being single? Like people needed a reason to explain your independence? That judgment isn't random. It's conditioning. Because society thrives on predictability. And single men disrupt the formula. They don't funnel into the same economic systems. They don't vote the same. They don't spend the same. They don't conform the same. They're wild cards, and wild cards can't be taxed, tracked, or tamed in the same way. So instead of asking, what if they're just choosing a different path? Society labels them loners, losers, threats. And quietly, it tries to pull them back in line. Wait, before you scroll, think about this. Why does independence in men scare people more than dependence does? Because a man who's alone but content, he's not selling his soul to validation. He's not controlled by romantic obligation. He's not performing for approval. He thinks, he questions, he resists. And resistance, real resistance, is dangerous in a system that needs you to comply without thinking. So the question isn't, why is he single? The real question is, what does his singleness threaten in you? Here's something society won't say out loud. It doesn't know what to do with a man who doesn't need it. A man who isn't chasing status. Who isn't trying to prove himself through relationships, money, or approval. Who isn't addicted to the performance of masculinity. Because that kind of man, he's unpredictable, unmarketable, unmanageable. He can't be easily boxed into husband, provider, protector. He's not playing a part. He's just being. And when a man is just being, without guilt, without apology, it makes everyone else question the roles they've been assigned. This is the part where most people get uncomfortable. If you're still here, it means you're built different. Stay with it. Because society thrives on comparison. If every man is running the same race, it's easy to measure worth. How much do you earn? What kind of partner do you have? How many kids? How stable? But when a man steps off the racetrack completely, refuses the timeline, rejects the checklist, lives on his own terms, he becomes a mirror. And people don't like what they see because his freedom highlights their chains. His peace exposes their chaos. His silence reveals their noise. So they attack him, not with violence but with dismissal. They call him cold, immature, emotionally unavailable, when in reality he's simply uninterested in playing a role that doesn't fit. Not every man wants the same life. Not every man needs to be tamed. Some are builders, some are warriors, some are lone wolves. And not because they're broken, but because they're awake. And once a man wakes up, you can't put him back to sleep. Let's kill a myth right now. Being single doesn't mean being lonely, but society wants you to believe it does. Because if single men aren't secretly miserable, then maybe, just maybe, their freedom is real. And that challenges everything we've been taught. A single woman is often pitied. A single man, he's viewed as dangerous, not because he's harmful, but because he doesn't need what others depend on. He's not chasing comfort. He's not begging for emotional security. He's not desperate to be completed. He is whole. And a whole man is powerful in ways the system can't quantify. He builds on his own schedule. He chooses where his time goes. He's not apologizing for his focus, his purpose, or his solitude. Be honest, have you ever mistaken solitude for sadness? If yes, what if you've been seeing it all wrong? Because solitude isn't suffering. It's space. Space to think, to build, to observe, to evolve. But here's the uncomfortable part. When a man embraces solitude, he becomes sovereign. He controls his time, his energy, his focus. And that's terrifying to those who want him distracted. Because a distracted man buys more, works more, proves more, and obeys more. But a clear-minded man, he sees the games. He sees the manipulation, and he walks away from it all. No drama, no explanation. Just gone. He's not avoiding love. He's avoiding compromise. He's not afraid of connection. He's afraid of losing himself in expectations he never agreed to. That's not loneliness. That's liberation. So the next time someone tries to pathologize your independence, as if being alone is a failure, just smile, because they're not really judging you. They're confronting the parts of themselves that are still scared to be alone. There's something unsettling about a man who doesn't need anyone, not because he's heartless, but because he's whole. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He doesn't prove. He doesn't panic when he's alone on a Friday night. He doesn't spiral when his phone is silent. And he doesn't base his worth on being chosen. And that shakes people to their core, because we've been taught to measure a man by his attachments, by who loves him, by who needs him, by how quickly he can be claimed. But a man who walks alone, with peace in his stride and no apology in his eyes, he breaks the algorithm. If you're still watching, don't blink. This next part will explain exactly why society feels threatened by him. Because he doesn't play predictable. He doesn't run on fear. He doesn't plug into the reward-punishment cycle of external approval. And when you can't manipulate a man with guilt or praise, you can't control him at all. So instead of facing that truth, society rewrites the narrative. It says he's emotionally unavailable, commitment-phobic, unhealed. But the truth? He's just uninterested in selling his soul for comfort. He knows who he is. He knows what he wants. And more importantly, he knows what he won't tolerate. This makes him dangerous, not to healthy people, but to systems built on compliance. He's not a rebel. He's a reminder that there's another way to live, that peace isn't found in possession, performance, or popularity. It's found in inner stillness, in choosing purpose over pressure, in standing alone and still feeling full. The most powerful man in the world isn't the richest. He's not the loudest. He's not the one with the most followers or the flashiest life. He's the one who can say no, and mean it. No to pressure. No to expectations. No to a life that doesn't align with his truth. And that kind of man, you can't sell to him. You can't shame him. You can't bait him with trends, likes, or validation. He doesn't buy into the game. He doesn't need the image. He's not afraid to be forgotten because he never relied on being noticed. You feel that? That's not detachment. That's power. Real, unshakable power. This man is dangerous to the system because he consumes with intention. He doesn't chase symbols of status. He doesn't define himself through external markers. His life is built from the inside out. And when a man like that walks through the world, he moves differently. He speaks differently. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't overcompensate. He simply is. And here's the real reason he's feared. You can't manipulate a man who doesn't crave your approval. You can't bribe him with sex. You can't guilt-trip him into loyalty. He's already at peace. And peace makes him ungovernable. You can't push him into buying things to fill a void he never created. You can't guilt him into a job, a lifestyle, a relationship, or a dream that was never his to begin with. He's unplugged. He's unbothered. And that makes him unstoppable. You can mock him. You can misunderstand him. But you can't ignore him, because his presence disrupts the matrix of need, noise, and narrative. He's proof that masculinity isn't performance. It's presence. It's not control. It's clarity. And that clarity, it's rare, it's radical, it's revolutionary. If you're still here, something inside you resonates with this truth. So do this. Like the video if even one line woke you up. Subscribe if you're done with shallow noise and ready for deeper thought. And share it with someone who's ready to stop performing and start becoming. Because the world doesn't need more nice guys. It needs more real ones. And real ones think like this. Freedom is the scariest thing a man can possess. Not the freedom to travel, not the freedom to make money, but the freedom to think independently. Because once a man starts thinking for himself, he becomes immune to manipulation. And that's when society panics. A man who doesn't need the group to tell him who he is, who doesn't seek approval from strangers, who doesn't follow trends just to fit in. That man is dangerous. Because he sees through the games. He doesn't get lost in identity politics. He doesn't worship brands or movements. He doesn't blindly trust authority. He thinks. He questions. He chooses. Pause. This is where most people get uncomfortable. Because deep down, we've all been trained to fear this kind of man. Why? Because he's unpredictable. You can't shame him into silence. You can't flatter him into submission. You can't buy his loyalty, because his loyalty belongs to truth, not tribe. He walks into a room and changes the dynamic without saying a word. He doesn't posture. He doesn't pretend. His very existence exposes the insecurity of those still playing roles. And here's the kicker. He's not trying to be feared. He's just trying to be free. But in a world built on control, freedom looks like rebellion. So they label him. They isolate him. They push him out of the conversation. Because deep down, they know. If more men start thinking like him, the whole game collapses. The economy of insecurity would crash. The politics of fear would unravel. The manipulation machine would short-circuit. And what would be left? A man, rooted, silent, clear, and completely untouchable. There's something society deeply fears. A man who can't be controlled by shame. A man who doesn't collapse when called arrogant. Who doesn't chase approval when labeled selfish. Who doesn't compromise his values just to belong. He's untouchable. Not because he's perfect, but because he's rooted. He knows who he is. And that clarity is louder than any insult thrown his way. You can't guilt him. You can't flatter him. You can't scare him with loneliness or failure or rejection. Because he's made peace with all of them. He's done the inner work. He's walked through the fire of isolation. He's stripped away the performance. And now, all that's left is truth. So, let me ask you, how much of your life is shaped by fear of being misunderstood? Because most people live in cages built from other people's opinions. They walk carefully. They speak safely. They water down their truth just to avoid discomfort. But the man we're talking about, he's broken that mold. He's not afraid of being alone. He fears being fake. He's not afraid of losing others. He fears losing himself. And when a man stops fearing judgment, he becomes free in a way that society can't handle. Because a man like that can't be used. He can't be dragged into guilt-based relationships. He can't be sold fake dreams of success. He can't be moved by pressure, only by purpose. And here's the part that really unsettles the world. He doesn't need to prove he's powerful. His stillness is his power. He doesn't argue. He doesn't posture. He just exists, fully, boldly, unapologetically. That's why society doesn't just misunderstand him. It resents him. Because his existence forces a mirror in everyone else's face. A reflection that says, you could be this free too, if you were brave enough to let go. A man who's free, truly free, doesn't need to speak loudly. His presence speaks for him. He walks into a room and the energy shifts, not because he demands attention, but because his energy is centered, calm, clear, unshaken. People notice. Some are drawn to it. Others are threatened by it, because his existence does something dangerous. It exposes the noise inside others. He's not trying to impress. He's not laughing too hard or talking too much. He's not trying to be liked. He's just being real. And that kind of presence, it reveals everything artificial. This is where most people click away. Don't. This is where it gets real. Because people don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't predict, what they can't control, what doesn't follow the script. And this man, the single, silent, unbothered man, he tore up the script a long time ago. He's not here to perform. He's here to live. And when people can't figure him out, they try to define him by force. They say he's angry. They say he's cold. They say he's hiding something. But the truth is, he's hiding nothing. He's just stopped explaining. He's no longer interested in defending his path to those who are afraid to take their own. Because here's what society never tells you. The freer you become, the more uncomfortable you make those who aren't. And you know what? That's not your problem. That's their mirror. You didn't break the rules. You broke out of the illusion. And once you do that, there's no going back. There's something tragic about being the man who refuses to play the game. Not because he's wrong, but because the world can't handle what he represents. You don't see men like this in mainstream media. You don't hear their voices often. You don't read their stories in glossy magazines, because they're not easy to market. They're not flashy. They don't beg for attention. They don't fit into a target audience. So instead of celebrating them, society erases them. Let me ask you, have you ever felt invisible because you weren't willing to perform? Because that's what happens when you're not trying to impress. You stop being useful to the system. You become irrelevant in the eyes of people who only see value in validation. And that irrelevance? It's actually liberation. You're not made for the spotlight. You're made for alignment. You're not here to play roles. You're here to live with truth. And people hate that. Because when a man is no longer afraid to be forgotten, he becomes unforgettable. He doesn't chase legacy. He lives legacy, not through fame, not through applause, but through authenticity. He becomes the kind of man others whisper about, not because of what he owns, but because of how he moves, calm, collected, completely sovereign. And here's the irony. The more you step away from the performance, the more powerful your presence becomes. You weren't born to fit in. You were born to remind people what freedom looks like. And freedom, real freedom, is silent, still, and wildly disruptive. Maybe the reason society fears single sovereign men so much is because they're proof. Proof that you don't need validation to feel valuable. Proof that you don't need a title to have purpose. Proof that you can walk alone and still walk tall. These men don't hate connection. They just refuse to sacrifice themselves for it. They don't avoid relationships. They avoid cages disguised as love. They've chosen freedom over performance, peace over approval, depth over drama. And that choice, it threatens every system built on fear, guilt, and dependency. Because here's what they won't admit. The world doesn't fall apart when a man walks away. It just reveals how fragile it really was. And in that moment, when he steps back, when he says no, when he chooses his path, he reclaims something no one can take from him. His mind, his time, his soul. If that idea stirs something in you, maybe it's time to stop watching and start walking your own path. Because being feared isn't about being dangerous. It's about being independent. And independence is terrifying to those who can't control it. So if this message hits something real in you, don't let it be just another video you forget. Like it, share it, pass it on. Not for me, for every man who's been silently walking this road alone. Let him know he's not crazy, he's not broken, he's not lost. He's free, and freedom is always misunderstood until it's envied.